Unlock the future of pathology with Pathology News, your ultimate source for cutting-edge insights, expert analysis, and the latest breakthroughs in digital and computational pathology. Don't just stay informed, stay ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening, wherever you happen to be listening to us and whatever time of day. Welcome to Pathology News and to our latest Thought Leaders piece. Now, in these podcasts, we interview leading lights in our industry, key players in our industry. And today, I'm pleased to welcome Katharina von Loga, who is head of pathology at Owkin. Katharina, hi.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Let's start asking a little bit about yourself. For the sake of the audience, tell us what brought you into digital pathology and AI and perhaps your role at Owkin.
Sure. I'm a pathologist by training, and I did my postdoc at the Institute of Cancer Research in London, and I was one of the first users of the early platforms of multiplex immunofluorescence. And that came with an inbuilt image analysis software with some limited but AI capabilities for segmenting and classification of cells. And it was at the heights of enthusiasm around immunotherapy. And I suddenly was able to quantify immune cells that before we just had a semi-quantitative approach. And yeah, it blew my mind. I think it was a combination of two new technologies and being one of the first people to actually use it. And ever since, I got more and more involved in different pathology AI projects in collaborations with different groups and so on. At some point, I had my own lab where we also built some basic, but still AI tools that were based on immunofluorescent pathology, but also H&E. And at some point, I discovered and joined Owkin. And that's when I really delved into it completely and found the other end of what AI can do. Because before, at the beginning, it was mostly supervised models, but Owkin is really good in going beyond the pathologist support tool and really developing weakly supervised models that I had no access before. And that was, I think, the latest point when I was very convinced that's something big to come.
Okay, thanks. And I think you're really working at the intersection of two technologies here, because obviously digital pathology itself, or the digitization of the pathology lab, has been around for quite a while, probably 20 years or so now. But suddenly in the last few years, we have this separate layer, and it very much is a second layer of technology in the artificial intelligence. And do you think that the AI part of this is giving much more power to the business case, in that it's always been a struggle for traditional digital pathology to actually say it's faster than the pathologist, or it gives quicker results for the patient? I think AI is a little bit different, isn't it? We suddenly got an improvement in the business case.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was part of the board in my previous role to actually enable digital pathology for the hospital. And yes, that was one of the big pieces for the business case, is trying to preempt what AI will allow us at a stage where we are completely analog. And it's quite interesting because we already see the capabilities of AI, but when you really look in what we use at the current standard is still very far for most labs from actually using the high-end AI that is available. So I was very excited to see and to actually have hands-on experience with the AI, and that made, I think, the case for going digital much stronger.
And it's probably fair to say that evolutionary stage where AI is becoming equivalent to the pathologist, and perhaps fair to say in terms of false negatives, false positives, it's at least as good as the pathologist in many cases now. And I guess the expectation of the future is that the AI continues to improve in capability. Do you think there are any memorable cases for you where the AI has provided something a little bit unexpected?
Oh, yeah, almost on a daily basis. It's just interesting what you said about being as good as the pathologist, because at least the models at Owkin are mostly complementary to what we do as pathologists. So I think I see AI mostly as being next to the pathologist and expanding our possibilities and giving a different lens to the pathologist. But in terms of memorable cases, yes, absolutely. Part of my job is to scrutinize the models that we develop. And the first one is very basic. Is it making sense? Is what the model looks at actually the tumor? So if it's for some specific tumor prediction, obviously we want to see that it focuses on the tumor. Something very basic, but still you need to make sure that it understands the concept of the question that we are asking. But once that is established, and I trust that the AI model actually does what it should be doing, I can go into depth and try to understand what it does, how it comes to its prediction. And so that's the big interpretability assessment that I'm doing for each of the models that we develop. And for example, for one of our models that is already CE marked, it's the MSIntuit model that is a pre-screen model to identify MSS or MSI cases on H&E, and therefore limit the cases that need to go through IHC testing. And for that, I have a extensive list of cases where I see what the model which features the model seems to be seeing as relevant to its final prediction. So I have the ones that are relevant for predicting it's likely an MSI case, and the ones that are relevant for coming to the conclusion this is more likely to be an MSS case. And when we talk about MSI, we all think of high lymphocyte infiltration, medullary subtype, something like that. But when I just look at the patches, it goes beyond that. I see a lot of neutrophils quite in next to lymphocytes that seem to be relevant for MSI prediction, which is something that maybe not completely new, but in the extent, it's not as well described that neutrophils seem to be also very relevant for MSI prediction. But that was only on the MSI part. When I looked at what is really predictive of a non-MSI phenotype or MSS I found a high number of eosinophils. And I don't really know what it means, but for some reason, it seems that when you have high eosinophil infiltration, it's more likely to be MSS. And if you know what it means, please tell me. And if anyone does, get in touch. But I thought that's quite interesting. I looked it up, I couldn't find anything. Through the lens of AI, I'm observing new features that I didn't pay attention to. So I think I'm learning a lot from AI.
Yes. Yeah, so I think there are two points coming out in what you're saying there. One is that AI does have the capability to teach us, particularly as it evolves further, and point us in the direction of perhaps things that have been overlooked in the past or not observed. But also, I think you're touching on the notion of understandable AI, which, again, is very important. I know personally when I speak to pathologists, most pathologists want to have an understanding of what the AI is actually doing and which features it's looking at. And the notion of having a black box makes them a little bit fearful because, of course, they have to sign off the diagnosis. Is that something you've discovered yourself?
It's a good point because I'm discussing that point over and over with people. So I feel like I understand the skepticism and also the responsibility that we have as pathologists signing something out. But there are actually three factors that I think are extremely relevant for tackling that, if you want, problem. One is AI is a broad term for different types of models, right? It makes a difference whether we are talking about a pathologist support tool where you see which cells it takes into the calculation for its final score. And you can even interact and say, don't take this into account, focus on this area, whatever. That's clearly, you have the live confirmation that it works the way you want it to work. It becomes a bit more difficult if you have models that are more a biomarker or outcome prediction where, you get a final result, high risk, low risk, or present, not present for a biomarker. And you just need to either trust that it's right by over time, it gets the results every time it gets it right. If it's for an outcome prediction, obviously you don't want to wait 5 years for it to be right, but you want to build the trust earlier. But it's not a full black box, right? It comes with, for example, the attention heat map. Which areas did it consider as relevant? And that's something that I look at in detail. And I actually encourage everyone to not only look at one heat map, but to look at several patients so that you can identify the patterns that seem to be of relevance. And that comes obviously by looking at a few more samples. That's one thing. I think also AI comes with an extra layer of scrutiny or skepticism. And I think, and that's just a hypothesis, but I think it's because we know AI from our personal lives, right? That GPT, we've seen hallucinations. And yes, that's scary if that's something that we put our patients through. But I think, and that's really relevant, there's a big difference between the AI that we use in our personal lives that is just thrown on the market for us to be better users at it, and AI in healthcare that goes through regulatory approval and has done all the testing and validation before it's actually ready to be included. So I think that's also very in terms of how AI is. When we talk about AI, we often refer to our own experiences, and that is not from our personal life. And the third point is, because you mentioned we need to sign it out, right? As pathologists, we need to sign out something that comes out of an AI, and how do I know what it did? But I always refer to what we do the same with molecular testing, right? We, as pathologists, we don't run NGS ourselves. We hand it over to molecular pathologists, which is usually run by a molecular biologist. We get back the results, and we don't go and question whether that KRAS mutation is actually fully validated. What was the controls that were run side by side and something like that. So we trust at some point, because we know it's driven and run with high standards and quality controls, we trust that is the correct test and test result. And then we integrate it in our report and make it a comprehensive analysis and conclusion. And I think that's where AI at least the more independent AI models will have a similar role. It's, yes, we need to build the trust, and it's still for the pathologist to understand what the model can do and what it cannot. Not it's replacing our assessment. It's more, I think what the AI prediction shows is actually fitting what I saw in my H&E analysis or IHC. So I think that's where the pathologist comes in. It's like making sense of all the different results that we get and integrating them in a final report.
We're talking about different degrees of AI transparency, aren't we? And how much transparency will be required perhaps in the future as pathologists become more and more used to using artificial intelligence or being assistance from artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I also think I think we need to actively engage with the AI. There's always this binary approach, either you like it or you hate it. But I think there's this, get familiar with it, see what it does, see what it can do, see where it struggles in order for you to build trust, especially because it's still something that is relatively new. Because we can see the internal control and so on, but also because we have used it on other markers. For AI, it's still, most people have not used a specific AI for a long time. So it's still to build trust. And obviously companies provide us with all the performance metrics, but that's a number. And very often that number doesn't mean much to us until, at least the pathology lens is still usually a visual one, until you see it. And I want to see the image. It's pretty much what I tell my data scientists on a daily basis. Show me the images, because numbers, it can only tell me so much. And if it's 100% sensitivity, that's impressive. But what it does and what it cannot do.
And it's a very overused analogy, but it is rather fly-by-wire in an aircraft where a large plane is landing in thick fog and the pilots have their hands off the controls and they're trusting computers to do it for them. And there are 300 people's lives that depend on it getting that right. And fly-by-wire has been with us long enough that pilots trust that, and they don't question why it's putting the flaps out or increasing the engine power and that sort of thing. And I guess it's quite similar, isn't it? It's just a familiarization process, ultimately.
Oh, yeah. The pilot, if it's the first time they are relying on the machines and it's fog, I'm pretty sure they would not be easygoing and just trusting. So trust needs to be built up over time, ideally in cases when they still can see that it's working. So ideally not fog, but it's, as said, the models on the market that are regulatory approved are stress tested over and over. So it's not like you are the first person to test it. It's more, I think it's still necessary for you to understand what it can do and build the trust. But you're not starting from zero. So I think that's an important message.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Owkin's products. Do you specialize in specific tissues, specific biomarkers, for example?
No, tissue open to any relevant cancer types. I guess for AI companies, there is a bit of a focus on cancers that are not extremely rare, just because obviously the development takes a long time and also quite some investment. So you want it to be ideally applicable to a wider patient cohort than just rare tumors. So there is a bit of a limitation, but that's more of not necessarily morphological or AI development reason. It's more a commercial and marketing reason. So open to all tumor types, but pretty much most advanced in colorectal for the MSIntuit model that I mentioned, which is the pre-screen model that can reduce the workflow burden, especially for IHC testing. That's one product that is quite advanced, has already CE marking for its version 1. And then we have one product that I think I'm pretty excited about, because it's one of the tools that I think AI comes in its full power, and that's a relapse risk, where we can predict whether patients are likely to relapse after 5 years. So and pretty much what we do on H&E by saying, hey, this is high-grade tumor and it looks aggressive, and we put it into stage and grade. But that's complementary, doing also a risk assessment, but based on its own features. And that means patients can, at the point of diagnosis, already be preempted as, oh, this is high risk. Maybe we need to adapt treatment and escalate. Or for patients that are low risk, maybe we can de-escalate treatment. That's a tool that I think is extremely powerful because it has a direct impact on the patient life. So I like that. It's more like informing oncologists, pathologists. So it's really at the intersection of pathology and oncology.
Yeah. And there you're highlighting clear patient benefits as well as actually cost benefits in avoiding unnecessary IHC.
So for the MSIntuit model. Oh, that's a good point. I don't know if we ever have done like the numbers. I'm pretty sure we have that somewhere. But obviously, I'm looking from the perspective of the pathologist, waiting for IHC to come for me to look at. And obviously, that's a delay, right? It's not made, but I cannot sign out the case until I have these 4 IHC stains. That's one thing. Then obviously, if we have a lot of samples from colorectal cancer patient, that means a lot of patients need that reflex testing, and most of them will have a MSS phenotype. So essentially, we run the test without having additional benefit for the patient in the end. And that's clocking up the autostainers for other IHCs that we actually need to run for all the other tumors. That's on the workflow service side in pathology labs, where I see that is extremely relevant. But also the pathologist can save the time of looking at the IHC and waiting for them to sign up the case, because the result is there once they get to see the H&Es to form their case.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about the future role of the pathologist, because obviously the whole world of the pathologist is changing dramatically with the evolution of AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think pathology gets ever more complex in terms of we need to integrate more and more tests. So that's independent of AI and digital pathology. But that's where I hope AI and digital will actually help. Because if we run more and more tests or be more and more specific about different features that are relevant for a certain type of treatment, that will take longer. That's additional work we need to do. And I, at the moment, don't see that there are more pathologists coming out of med school or willing to go into the subject. So we need to optimize how we do our pathology reporting, and AI can help at different levels throughout the workflow. It can make us quicker, it can make us more reliable, but it can also complement us in some of the tests that we are asked to run. So I think there is no way around AI. It's just a matter of when and how, not so much whether it's coming.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed actually that Owkin did a report, I think you called it State of the Nation report, which was a survey of pathologists and oncologists in several countries to look a little bit at the challenges they were facing. Perhaps you could tell us something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was on more than 300 people, both pathologists and oncologists, as you said, in the US, the UK, and France. And so the idea was to get an understanding of where does the field stand in terms of openness towards digital pathology, but mostly AI, because everyone likes new technology, but what actually prevents it for it to be established? And what was, I think, a surprising outcome, or maybe not so surprising to us, but I guess in terms of seeing the actual numbers, is that the field has shifted and is quite open towards AI. So I think the whole idea of, or fear of, will AI replace us is hopefully gone, and because that's definitely not the case. But it's also looking into, okay, what are the factors that are still preventing us for going either digital or implementing AI? So I think it's quite an comprehensive assessment, and I encourage everyone to read it because it gives really insights into different minds, and we are usually in our little bubble and we get to see the people that are like-minded. So it was quite interesting to see, for me as being one of the probably more enthusiasts around digital and AI, that I'm not a lonely fighter out there anymore.
That's great. And actually, for our audience, we'll put a link up to that white paper. Okay, how do you feel about the sort of future of digitization generally? Because we do actually have young pathologists coming through in some countries now, and I know I've spoken to labs in the US and in France actually, where there are young pathologists coming through who have never signed off on a microscope. And I think that's quite an interesting and transformative change in the industry, because that almost forces digitization, because young people are so used to digital images, they're becoming used to AI assistants, and it is very difficult for them to go and work in a lab that signs off on microscopes. So I wonder if we'll evolve in a two-tier system where perhaps you have labs that use microscopes and labs that are entirely digital. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess that's the intermediary path, right? It's like point these people will likely stick to larger pathology departments where they have digital opportunities. At some point, I I see that the benefits of digital, particularly AI, will also reach the ones that are absolutely fine at the moment with just being on a normal microscope and not being digital, right? Because at the moment, the benefits are just there once you have an established digital path, a workflow, and what you may have one or two AIs integrated in it, but it's still very patchy. But once you have several companion diagnostic requiring a certain AI to be run for these patients, yes, you can send them all to a larger center, but at some point that will not keep up your business. At some point you need to catch up. So I think my question is rather, how long can we sustain the current standard analog workflow? And I think it's still a few years. I don't expect this to be an immediate switch to all being digital, but I don't see that something sustainable for the next coming decades. No.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if we look over, say, a 20-year time horizon, this is going to be, let's say, a generation of rapid change and rapid digitization, because there are huge patient benefits there as well. And I think actually, again, I saw something on Owkin's website. I think there is actually a white paper which looks into this a little bit, and in actually the development of AI diagnostics of pathology and the transformative potential in patient care.
Yeah, it's a nice white paper, really going into the depth of how Owkin develops AI for pathology. Again, particularly around the fact that Owkin's models are not necessarily what other companies, AI companies, do. It's really rather on the spectrum of biomarker and outcome prediction. And that is, for a lot of people, new, or like the AI they have certainly not touched. And what it does is it really explains step by step how these models are developed, but also how they can be positioned in the workflow and how they can impact patients. So it's very much from how do we start in developing models to what does it mean for patients and the future of pathology. So it's a good read, worthwhile reading.
Yeah. And then just for our audience, I think that white paper is called From Slide to Device, and you can find it on the Owkin website.
Yes.
Worth taking a look at.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There's still, we talk about this evolution in the next 10, 15, 20 years, and we're agreeing with each other here. We're in a transformative stage with the implementation of digital pathology together with AI, but there is still significant barriers to adoption. And in most surveys, the main barrier is, of course, cost to digitize, because this is not just about buying a slide scanner. You are embarking on acquiring a whole digital infrastructure, and it's very costly. But in terms of AI, we also have the current regulatory landscape. And we look at recently what the FDA tried to do. I know there is now a court ruling against them and their ability to actually impose restrictions on LDTs, for example. And it's almost as though the FDA are becoming more conservative about the development of new technologies, particularly when it concerns digitization and AI. So how much do you think regulation is and is going to continue to be a barrier to development in this industry?
It's interesting because I think it's a barrier as well as an enabler, because what I see that regulatory approved products can do is build trust and therefore adoption, right? Because as mentioned, it's a big difference whether you have AI as a medical device with regulatory approval compared to a kind of home-built AI model that works on your patients, your staining, your scanner, but cannot be generalized across different institutions or even scanners. So I think we need both. We need to have the longer term push for getting these models that really impact patient or decisions for patients through regulatory bodies, but also with the possibility of developing your own models. We create, first of all, hands-on experience, but also we get to see which ones are worthwhile developing further into a full product or medical device. So I think it's good that we have a pause on the LDT decision, just because I think it makes us a bit creative around AI, and we're still in an early phase of exploring, and that's more encouraged. If we are going longer term, I very much appreciate that we have regulatory approval for these models, because that means they can be used for that limited purpose that it's designed for. It's not like ChatGPT, you use it for anything. It's really a very defined purpose, but it performs to the level expected because it's validated over and over on different sets of patients, different scanners, different labs, whatever. It comes with the label approved, worth a lot.
But currently, I think we very much approve point solutions. So this scanner, this biomarker, this AI algorithm together. And if you change any of those, even if you perhaps change the viewer or the screen, you have to get a new approval or 510K. That's the difficulty. And I think as AI develops and solutions come onto the market more quickly, and we also have initiatives such as agentic AI, where the AI may even define which tissue it is or identify which tissue it is before applying to our algorithm. It seems to me that there's almost a collision course set up between regulators and the evolving technology.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. And maybe there needs to be a change in regulation, either the pace of regulation or regulation needs to become more general and applicable to a range of tools rather than single point solutions.
Yes, I think that's a very relevant point. Yes, the patchiness of each of the parts throughout the workflow needs separate regulation. And understand the concept, it makes sense. But yes, the speed of development is quite different for software compared to hardware. So obviously, you cannot expect the same timelines for two very different types of devices, even though they all fall under the same medical device group, right? So yes, I think it definitely needs adjustments in terms of keeping up to the speed of development in a new technology space.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think we're coming to the end now, Katharina. I just wanted to ask you one final question, really, which is, what excites you most personally about the future of AI and pathology?
A lot. And I kind of feel like I'm already in the midst of it, because I guess I'm a few years ahead of most diagnostically working pathologists, because I'm doing that. That's my work, working with AI on a daily basis. But I think there are still some chapters that AI is not yet explored, or at least not yet at its full potential. And that's mostly AI across multimodalities, where at the moment we do testing side by side. We do our H&E testing, we do IHC, we do NGS, whatever. We bring it all into a report, but the implications are based on one of them. They are not taken into a big merge conclusion. And that's where I think, and it's very difficult, right? It's what does one data point from one modality weigh compared to the other? But that's, I think, where AI can help, because it can run all the different permutations over and different combinations and see which factors how much into the final conclusion. And we're just at the advent of doing that. Again, the relapse model that we have it's the minor version of multimodality. It takes not only the image, the H&E image into account, it also takes some basic clinical variables into the model. And the predictions are better if you have the combination rather than comparing one to just the clinical component versus just the image component. So putting them together makes the prediction more accurate, which is exciting. But again, it's still very basic multimodality. And I see that's something that we can explore much further. And we have so many different technologies that we are at a good development stage, transcriptomics, genomics, the whole proteomics workflows. But at the moment, we struggle to how to put them all together and meaningful conclusions for patients. In research, we have them and we conclude on a certain gene or protein or something. But the patient prediction or drug selection, that's where I think we can still put a lot of work in and improve.
Yeah. And then we're very lucky because pathology is at the center of all those domains and integrates many technologies, and I think will increasingly do so in the future.
Yeah, I don't feel that we're running out of our job.
Yeah, exactly. We work in a very exciting domain.
We do.
Both of us. And Owkin is clearly at the forefront of that and is producing state-of-the-art products. I appreciate you talking to me today, Katharina. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And that concludes our interview for today. And to our listeners, please join us on the next Thought Leaders series. Thank you very much. Goodbye.